Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. You don't have to go anywhere to find the most terrifying place in my town. It comes to you. In my town, the most dangerous place is the abandoned Macy's department store, the basement, to be more precise. It's not easy to find, but people still manage to, mostly by accident. You're perfectly safe. As long as at least one of your feet stays on the stairs, you're supposed to just go back up, and eventually it'll move on. I'm not sure how many people have found it. Lots of people claim to, but it's hard to verify. Those that do take both feet off the stairs, well, no one hears from them to find out what comes next. Most of them probably end up listed as a missing person. That's why I'm writing this. I want people to know what happened to my sister and my friends. And if I can't figure something out soon, too, I want to share what it's really, truly like down here. I know, it doesn't sound that bad. A basement full of abandoned clothes and items with no windows, so the darkness is only broken up by smatterings of flickering light, where if you listen closely enough you'll hear another set of quiet footsteps always just behind you. But trust me, it's the most terrifying place I've ever been, and I'd give literally anything to leave. The store sprawls on for what must be miles. It's overwhelming in its vastness, yet not an inch of it is safe. Something pursues you down here, or maybe even multiple things. It's hard to tell. I can guess what you're thinking. A department store that people disappear into. That'd be shut down in an instant. Yes, you're right, and it was, back in the early 2000s. It used to just be a normal store. People shopped there for years without incident, but then something changed. No one is quite sure what caused it, but one day, no one that stepped into the basement ever came back out. Once it became apparent that there was no hope in saving those that were lost, the whole place was eventually torn down. As you can probably guess, that's not where the story ends. The basement still manages to claim people. The only difference now is that you don't go downtown to where the old Macy's used to be and take the escalator down. To get there, now, at least in my town, any escalator, elevator, or set of stairs you take down could bring you down here instead of where you were intending to go. It doesn't matter where you are or where they usually lead. One of my classmates once claimed that he was just going downstairs in his house, but upon reaching the last step before the bottom, instead of his living room, he was staring into the basement of the store. I believe him, too, because his story lacked the bravado of others I've heard. You could tell he was deeply afraid. He also mentioned things that I now know to be true from my own experience, like the smell of old and decaying things, the odd stale breeze that emerges like a sigh from deep within the windowless store. There are some steps you can take to increase your odds of finding this place, but I'm not going to share those here. I don't need that in my conscience. For my entire life, it's just been a given that you always have to be vigilant and pay close attention to where you are, because rumor has it that if you take both feet off the stairs, you're stuck here forever. It turns out it's not just a rumor. There were 5 of us before. We had tried so many times to find this place. My sister and I were fascinated by the stories, as were a few of our friends, and wanted to see if it was real. Most of us were curious, but my sister Maddie, she was straight up obsessed. If we found it, we weren't actually going to go in. Maddie had promised me. We tried several times before, but we were successful a few days ago. We went to the top floor of Keith's dorm and went down so many flights. But eventually, somewhere around where the 4th floor should have been, we finally found it. Rows upon rows of decaying clothes and random items greeted us. For as far as the eye could see, the weak overhead lighting only illuminated so far into the distance. After that, it was just blackness. But you could feel the vastness of it. It was breathtaking, and not in a good way. A soft moan could be heard from just beyond the threshold, but we couldn't see the source. Maddie wanted to put her hand through, she said, to snap a picture. She did, and it came back a pixelated mess. She was disappointed and put one foot down onto the basement floor to lean in for a better shot. When nothing seemed to happen, she got bold and put both feet down. She turned around to grin at us, but the smile instantly left her face and was quickly replaced by what seemed to be a mix of fear and confusion. Her eyes widened and darted back and forth as she searched around. Frantically, she called out, and I waved my hands and yelled to her. I was just inches from her, but when I reached out, I couldn't touch her. She didn't seem to hear or see us, but she seemed to catch a glimpse at the source of the moaning. I'm not sure what she saw, but whatever it was, the sight of it caused her to take off running with an expression of pure terror on her face. I could sometimes see her as she ran through the lit portions, but none of us could see what she was actually running from. Angie, Keith, Sky, and I went in after her. Mary ran back up the stairs. That's good. It means Mary probably survived. That was a while ago, a couple of days. Now, it's just me and the quiet footsteps that follow me through the aisles. It's funny, I used to think that the scariest thing in the world would be being chased by something just a bit faster than you. You turn back and you see it coming and just can't outrun it. But I've since found from recent experience that what's actually scarier is something that doesn't need to run after you, because you can keep going and going and going, but eventually you'll run out of energy or become cornered. And it knows that. You just hear the slow, deliberate, wet slap of bare flesh on linoleum. It doesn't have to run. Eventually you will fall, and it will take you. Distance doesn't seem to help. It approached me from directions that I would have thought impossible once it was far behind me, and then suddenly pursued me from the front. That was the one time I saw it, just a glimpse of details as it emerged into a dimly lit portion of the aisle. I hope I never see it again. I'm still holding out hope that dehydration gets me first. You can't tell day from night down here. There are no windows, just weakly flickering fluorescent lights in some areas and a darkness unlike anything I've seen before in others. It's disorienting and makes it so easy to imagine what must be lurking in the shadows, just out of sight. I'm grateful I have my phone with me. Before now I just used it to check the time or illuminate pitch black areas and turn it off to conserve the battery. But when it finally sunk in that I was never leaving, I started writing this. It's been comforting in a way. This store is massive. It's got to be tens of miles, if not more. I've run and walked off and on for days and I've yet to find the end. I've stopped calling out for my sister or our friends, not because I've lost hope of finding them, but because I know something else already did. At first, I had been relieved when those footsteps finally veered off in a different direction and began to fade into the distance. I was so grateful for the chance to stop and rest that I didn't even think about what it meant at the time, until I heard the screams, far enough away that there was no way I could help, but close enough for me to hear everything. As bad as the screams are, the sounds that come after the screaming stops are always far worse. New people seem to join me from time to time. Sometimes I hear them. Once or twice I've seen them. I guess they took both feet off the stairs as well. I wonder where they came from, my town, or somewhere else entirely. But we're never close enough to ask, and I'd never risk shouting here. I've been down here long enough now that I've started noticing certain things, and the more I notice these details, the more they unnerve me. For example, the store and items within it seem to just grow and grow. For everyone that disappears down here, the store seems to grow just a bit bigger. The clothes and housewares I've run past, if you take a really close look, you'll see they aren't quite right looking. The textures are all wrong. They aren't made out of fabric, plastic, or metal. Everything in here is made of something else, something more familiar. Now that I'm looking, I've noticed that the clothes seem to sign with something like resignation under my touch. It's never truly silent down here. I've developed a theory. Maybe I'm just losing my mind, but I'm starting to suspect that there is no such thing as death down here. Maybe just deconstruction and remaking. I'm worried that I may find out very soon. I'm so tired. I don't even have the energy to sit upright, much less to continue onward. I hear the sharp sound of hangers slowly sliding on metal as it searches for me under racks of clothing. I hear footsteps far too close for comfort. I'm hoping that in sharing this, it will encourage more caution in others and maybe prevent a few thrill seekers from following in our footsteps. If you find that a perfectly ordinary trip down some stairs suddenly leaves you staring into this dark expanse, please just go back where you came from and don't look back. Please don't take both feet off the stairs. They want you to let them in. I have a bad habit of smoking in the shower. That was the reason the window was open in the first place, to let the smoke and steam out of the bathroom. It was only a few inches, I had told myself, and I lived next to the woods, so it wasn't like I was really in an area known for peeping toms. Still, the thin barrier between the outside and in had been breached. I left the window open when I went to bed. I should have just let the bathroom smell like smoke. But I had family coming over the next day. I guess at the time of writing this, that would be today. Still, when I woke up at 3 in the morning having to pee, I didn't expect to see the window open. Even less so did I expect a voice to come from the other side of it. "Hello, may I come in?" said a man's voice outside my window. It sounded happy, gleeful almost. It had a deep, resonant quality that almost made it sound like multiple voices. "No, thank you," I said. Stupid to respond, perhaps, but he clearly knew I was there. And again, I was half awake. The voice behind the window started again. "Oh, that's no fun. Won't you play along?" it asked. The timbre of his voice sounded almost disappointed, but I could still hear the smile behind it, and it sickened me to my core. All of a sudden, I heard a loud and immediate knock at my front door. "Delivery," said a slightly lower voice than the one at the window. I walked slowly across the tile, taking my time. When I reached the front door and finally looked through the peephole, there was no one there. As soon as I pulled away, the voice came again. "Special delivery. Won't you sign for your package?" It asked cheerfully. I realized that the voice sounded too loud, too clear, as if someone had been using a microphone. I was shaking my head no, but realized I hadn't responded aloud to the voice. "I'll get it in the morning. Thank you," I said, still trying to somehow appease the voice that was very clearly, impossibly, on every side of my house. The shock still hadn't hit me. It was too early to fully comprehend the severity of the situation. "Please, sign for the package. Open the door. Let me in." The deep voice was still jovial, but pleading now. It almost played on my sympathy. "Almost. No one delivers mail at 3 in the morning. Whatever you are, I won't let you in." It was so hard being blunt in the face of the pure, unadulterated terror I felt, but I knew that my terror was what it wanted, what it was trying to feed on. I tried to act quickly. I ran back to the bathroom as swiftly as I could, slamming shut the window in a futile attempt to get away from the voice's attention. Walking up close to the window filled me with dread and made the hairs in the back of my neck stand up. But still, I approached the window. Nearly the second it was closed, something hit the window, hard. I jumped back in surprise. It took me a full minute to recognize the face of one of my neighbors, a quiet woman from next door, pressed firmly against the glass. The angle that her head was facing made it very clear that there was nobody beneath it, as her neck was stuck to the left side of the window, clearly being held up. I retched, but couldn't keep my eyes away from where I knew my captor was standing. Just to the left of my window. "Oh, neighbor," came a practically singing voice, still the same voice as each time, but this time at a mockingly high pitch, clearly trying to emulate a woman's. "Won't you let me in?" it asked. "Something out here is trying to rip me into bloody fucking pieces." I stood absolutely still, as if I could still pretend to not have heard the voice. What options did I have at this moment? What could I do against a force that clearly had me surrounded and took pleasure in the fact? "Neighbor, please let me in, please." The falsely high-pitched voice was now begging. "He'll kill me. He'll dismember me. Who knows what he'll do to me then? Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The end of each sentence was punctuated by a slam of her head against the window. I was crying now, unable to stop myself. I had done nothing to deserve this, nothing to provoke whatever creature was hunting me. "Your lips aren't even moving," I whispered. This made the banging stop, and for a moment I thought I'd beaten the thing with just my words. I was so hopeful that this waking nightmare could come to an end that I didn't even question why they would give it pause. I was just happy it was over. "If you won't even pretend to play along with my little game," the creature snarled, "then why am I still pretending to need permission to come in?" A slow, steady knock came from every window and door in my house. The one in front of me, the one with my neighbor's head. The knock was being made by slamming her face into the window over and over again, turning it slowly into a bloody mess as I watched her skull fracture, and even then it did not stop. I couldn't look away. I wished I had run then, but where could I leave from without being followed? I had never been particularly fast. Instead, I watched in mute horror as the face kept slamming into my window, growing more and more deformed, knocking at every possible exit in my home. If my suspicions about my neighbor's lack of body had been false, she was very dead at this point. All at once, the knocking stopped and was replaced by a tiny metallic thump one at a time. I'm sure it could have unlocked every door at once if it had had a mind to, but I think it was still, even then, toying with me, still trying to convince me it was just one entity, that it could only be in one place at once. I ended up hiding in my bedroom closet. I could have picked somewhere less obvious if I'd had time, but I don't often catalog the best hiding places in my house. I've been sitting in here for about an hour, giving me time to type this. I think this is what it wants to be known for. I can hear it against the tile floor. It paces back and forth around my bedroom, claws skittering against the floor back and forth. Sometimes when it's closer, I can smell a musty forest scent mixed with the clear, unambiguous scent of my neighbor's blood. I tried calling the police, of course, but as the phone rang, I could hear the claws stop dead in their tracks, and I knew the punishment for telling them what was going on would be severe. I knew, somehow, that I was already dead and that this would simply speed up the process. I tried then to call some of my loved ones, to let them know I loved them. When I did this, the voice laughed uproariously, so much so that I knew they wouldn't be able to hear a word I said. When it laughed, I realized that it now sounded less loud, less clear than before, muffled behind the door of my closet. That's where I am now. I know that it's getting restless. I know that it's waiting for me to finish typing this so that other people can know it and can begin to fear it before it even comes for them. I wish I had advice or a moral. I wish this story could have a warning, like don't talk back to the voices outside your window at night. I wish all of those things, but now I was doomed from the moment I heard the voice, probably even before then, because I realized too late that the voice hadn't been coming from outside my window. The two were unrelated. The voice had been coming from inside my house the whole time. I didn't mean to kill my daughter. 75 seconds. The last time I asked my wife how much longer she'd be in the shower, it's what she'd said. It wasn't just over a minute or a little bit. It was exactly 75 seconds because my wife was a very precise person. Punctual, on time. She wouldn't be there in 10, she'd be there in 8.5 minutes. She was a woman who can count the time she's been late on one hand and still loses sleep over it. I realize I'm giving the wrong impression. My wife, Kathleen, is by no means crazy. She simply has a better sense of time than most and likes to show it off. She doesn't even have a watch. A game of ours is when I'll ask her the hour and she'll say the time while only ever being off by a few minutes. So, when she told the doctors that I was unconscious for a minute or two, I was a little shocked. I knew she was mad at me then. The hospital's policy is to keep you for at least one night if you lose consciousness for any amount of time, longer than 30 seconds, and it was a 3-day minimum. They were more concerned about my lapse of memory surrounding the moment when I hit my head. I know I was fixing the basement stairs. I remembered a brief jolt of panic as I fell, knowing my skull would slap against the stone floor. But that was it. I was apparently awake and talking by the time the paramedics arrived. But that memory is gone. Only now my short-term memory is healing. I can remember the hospital cafeteria slop I was fed for dinner last night. I can remember when my boss came to drop off a 6-pack of beer disguised in resealed Sprecher root beer bottles. But most of my thoughts were on my daughter. The hospital made me think of her, or what we had done to her. I had a set of adorable identical twins, and life was on its way to a fairy tale until Sophia, the oldest by 4 minutes and 37 seconds, started getting sick. And I don't mean physical, visible illness. It sounds so selfish, but I would have preferred cancer, disease, something that could be seen. But the sickness was in her head, and what was almost as bad as Sophia being sick herself was the hate from friends and family. People don't believe that a child could be depressed or paranoid or downright disturbed all on their own. It had to be us. There was an unsaid assumption that if a kid was fucked up before puberty, it was the parents' fault. It had to be the nurture because nature took care of kids' minds just fine. Kathleen lost some friends who accused me of abuse. We had CPS called on us multiple times. We didn't know what to do. We were just a couple of kids ourselves who decided to make a little human being. We were out of our depth. I couldn't stomach the trips to the clinics. Kathleen was used to the cleaning chemical stench and fluorescent strobe of hospital hallways. She said that before her sister, Cindy, lost her fight to a blood disease, her family was always in and out of every kind of medical institution, Western and non. I suppose I have to paint a picture so you can understand why parents would give up on their child. I don't want to be the bad guy here. Sophia liked to torture animals, set things on fire, stare at her mom and I as we slept. Classic serial killer shit. Her identical twin, Rachel, was normal. We tried expensive child therapy that left bills we couldn't pay. Kathleen couldn't stand the price, but I wanted it to be expensive. I wanted to be able to look myself in the mirror and say my wife and I went into debt to try to help our little girl. We did everything, and when nothing worked, and Sophia killed the neighbor's Newfie by using a punji stick trap she proudly told us was perfected by the Viet Cong and banned by the Geneva Convention, we sent her away. I knew this would happen. Kathleen sobbed in the passenger seat after we dropped Sophia at the Rainbow River Young Adult and Child Inpatient Psychiatric Treatment Center, a mouthful of a euphemism for insane asylum. Kathleen couldn't be consoled. She kept crying while my hand bobbed helplessly on her shoulder. Ever since they were babies, the day they were born, I knew it would always be this way. I knew we'd be here. I thought she was just being hard on herself. I didn't even think to ask how she could possibly know. There's nothing we could have done differently, I said. That's not true. She sniffed up her snot and wiped her eyes. We never had to have kids in the first place. This is the part that's personal, the part that I know most parents would omit. But when we got home, I was 100 pounds lighter. Sophia was gone, as far as I was concerned. When people asked, I had one daughter. We were a 3-person family now, and even our Christmas card would suggest so. We were one of those families with a dark secret, one that new friends would never learn no matter how close they got to us. Too embarrassing to ever tell, too easy to just forget. A daughter locked away. After a while, I really did begin to forget about her. Since Rachel and Sophia were identical, it wasn't hard to picture I had just one kid. There was no face I had to forget. If I saw Sophia in my dreams, it was easy to lie to myself and say it was Rachel. The only time my fantasy crumbled was when Rachel would ask about her. But as time went on, she asked less and less. Life was a fairy tale again, although with a little more of a dark Disney-esque twist. That was 2 years before I fell down the stairs, and to be honest, I hadn't gone to see Sophia since. 3 days later, I got home from the hospital and my life was the same as it was there, just with less linoleum. I was propped up in bed with the curtains drawn and the lights dimmed. Kathleen and Rachel had both been rather quiet since I woke up in that hospital bed. My girls were noisy. They had loud laughs and perhaps obnoxious voices if you didn't love them. But the doctors recommended no loud noises, so I was stuck in this subdued world for another couple weeks. The first day Kathleen came in, she set my food tray on the bedside table. I know it's against protocol, honey, but can you please just give me a hearty laugh? Hell, a yell, just something other than silence, I said. She tilted her head but didn't smile. You know I can't do that, she nearly whispered. You had a brain bleed. I paused and gently grabbed her wrist. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Where's your ring? She withdrew her hand from my grasp and smiled sadly. What? I nearly yelled as she walked toward the door. Kathleen. What happened when I fell? What did I do? Suddenly I was stricken with guilt. Did I do something awful that I couldn't remember? Kathleen, I called, but she said nothing and closed the bedroom door gently behind her. Suddenly I was afraid. Something was wrong, even if she wasn't mad at me. Kathleen being able to keep quiet easily made sense. She was an adult and would take the doctor's orders seriously. But Rachel, it seemed easy for Rachel, too. She didn't need any reminders to keep her voice down or play quieter. She seemed, for the first time in her life, disturbed. Just like her sister, night was the only time I could move around. Light in nearly any amount still made my brain throb. When it was well past dark, Kathleen still hadn't come up yet, and I figured she was watching TV in the basement so she wouldn't bug me. Or maybe she was avoiding me. I couldn't tell. I went to the kitchen to make myself some food. Kathleen also had been putting her usual amount of love into my meals. They were hastily tossed together. I jumped when I reached the stairs. Rachel was standing on the landing, staring at me. Hey, honey. I swallowed my spit nervously. I was afraid of a little girl. My little girl. But I thought maybe I was right, because she didn't respond right away. Rachel, Daddy, she paused. I think there's something wrong with Mommy. I turned on the hall light to better look at my daughter. When Rachel was just a toddler, she clipped her cheek on the corner of a coffee table. It was a surprisingly nasty gash, one that I actually hoped would leave a scar. Being a dad is difficult enough, and I wanted something other than hairstyles to tell my girls apart. But Rachel had been so young it healed completely. She and her sister were truly identical. What makes you say that, sweetheart? Lots of things. She was swaying her shoulders now. She said I need to come with her to work tomorrow. That made some sense. Rachel didn't have school the next day. It was a parent-teacher conference, and I couldn't look after her myself. Well, she's your mother, honey. You have to listen to her. Why don't you go back to bed? It's late. We'll talk about it in the morning. Rachel walked up the rest of the stairs towards her room, and I gave her an embarrassingly wide berth. She stood in her doorway and stared at me. She was waiting for me to tell her I loved her, surely. But I just bit my tongue, looking her over, and she said nothing, not even goodnight, and simply closed her door. I freeze this frame every day now. I play it back in my brain again and again. Rachel was staring at me from the doorway, waiting. I didn't know it then. It was subtle the way sinister things are, but I'm certain that was the worst moment of my life. The next day I woke up early and found Kathleen's side of the bed still empty, cold. The bedding was not even pulled back. It was an overcast day, but even if it were sunshine and clear skies, I knew I had to get out of bed. I knew something was wrong. Kathleen was not the type to sleep on the couch. I dialed Sophia's treatment center and was greeted with the kind cadence of receptionist who listens to panicked parents day in and day out. Hello, this may seem like a weird question, but I'm Sophia Davis's father. I'm wondering if she's there now, or if she has been suddenly acting differently. She confirmed my identity with my number and clicked her tongue against her teeth. Just a second, sir. Hold music. Elevator music. Saucy saxophones were the soundtrack of my life falling apart. It wasn't going to be John Williams. That's just not how life works. As reality cruelly unfolds, it likes to play little jokes like that to laugh along to your pain. Your life is falling apart. Listen to this sax riff. Sir, your daughter is fine. Her behavior the last few weeks has been reported as normal. Are you sure it's her? You see, she has a sister. Yes, we're certain it's Sophia. Thank you, I said quickly and hung up. I went outside, stumbling into the backyard to see if Kathleen's car was gone. But something caught my eye in the grass. It was my wife's phone, stone cold and wet with dew. It was dead, and I walked inside quickly to charge it. There would be something on there that would tell me what was going on. Text to her best friend. Google searches, but it was nothing like that. When it turned on, she had dozens of missed calls and text. 100 notifications. Her phone had been off for days, 4 days exactly. I was able to figure out from the age of the oldest notification. The texts were concerning an angry boss. Her friends thought that she was mad at them. But the voicemails, there were several, all from a psychiatric center. Dr. Ritter had left voicemail after voicemail. I yanked the phone from the charger and paced where I had space in the backyard to listen to them. I knew then why my wife was prophetic about Sophia's fate. Why was she so sure ever since our girls were born that Sophia would end up in a psych center? I dropped the phone back to the grass. The side door to the garage was slightly ajar, but I already had a feeling of what was inside. I pushed the door open, and laying in a circle of dried blood was my wife, wedding ring shining on her finger. From the flies and the stench, I knew she'd been dead for days. My wife was here, dead. That means I sent Rachel with her. I told her to listen to her mom. I ignored my daughter's gut and didn't even tell her goodnight. I killed my girl with those words. I can't pretend I didn't, because that wasn't her mother. Kathleen's sister, Cindy, is alive. And they're twins, identical, just like my daughters. As it turns out, Cindy likes to torture and kill things too, and she escaped from her insane asylum just 4 days ago. I'm a park ranger, and I found a town that doesn't exist. I must be going crazy. I can see a town that doesn't exist. My name is Samuel Baker. I'm a Yellowstone National Park Ranger, and I need some advice. I've spent my entire career fighting wildfires for the National Park Service, and after 2 decades in the field, I thought I'd seen everything. Then, about 4 hours ago, an entire town just appeared in the middle of Yellowstone National Park, and the other ranger and I are the only ones who have been in it. We're not alone, however, as you might expect from something appearing out of nowhere inside one of America's most famous parks. The town is home to many people, some of whom have been there for years. They all seem perfectly normal, but they aren't aware that they live inside a national park. My partner, Thomas, was the first to notice the town. He'd driven into the valley a few hours before dawn one morning and saw a brand new sign on the road. "Welcome to Hungry Horse," it read. When he drove past the next bend in the road, he saw the motel. That's when he turned around to come and get me. The two of us had driven up the valley together in our trusty old Chevy Blazer and taken a long way around because we hadn't wanted to pass through the town until we were sure what it was. We parked at the base of the mountain and hiked up. We walked across the railroad tracks and past a small gas station with a line of oil drums full of diesel fuel and another filled with water. The street was lined with old cars, some of which looked like they'd been there for a while, others which had probably just arrived that morning. Hungry Horse wasn't a ghost town, or even abandoned. It was thriving. Thomas and I entered the town cautiously because despite appearances, this place could be dangerous. While we didn't run into any trouble, we did notice that everyone seemed indifferent to the fact they just appeared out of nowhere. Most of them ignored us completely, although a few gave us strange looks. "Some of these people look familiar," I said, looking over at Thomas. He nodded. "I know what you mean, Sam. I recognized a couple people in the diner too. It's weird. It's weird." Those words echoed in my head as I watched a man carrying a bucket walk down the sidewalk. "It's weird," I repeated silently to myself. My eyes followed his movements. The man carried himself with confidence and purpose, but he never looked up at where he was walking. Instead, he stared straight ahead and continued forward without looking back once. He disappeared around the corner of a building, and I noticed another person staring directly at me. He was tall and thin, wearing a black hiking jacket. His face was pale and he was bald. He was standing in the doorway of a small coffee shop. He reminded me of the missing hiker we had searched for last week. That's when I realized why I recognized some of the people here. They are all people who have vanished from national parks. That's how we found out that almost every single person in Hungry Horse had been reported missing from national parks. We spoke to everyone we could find, Some refused to talk, others were friendly enough, but none of them knew anything about why they were there. As far as they were concerned, they lived in Hungry Horse, Montana. They weren't sure exactly when they arrived there. A lot of them couldn't remember much before arriving in Hungry Horse. They also told us they'd been here for years. Many of them had been born and raised in the town and believed it was the real deal. They all knew the townsfolk by name and went to school with them. One woman, an older lady named Irene, told us that she had no idea that she'd been reported missing. She worked at the local hardware store and had been living in Hungry Horse for more than 45 years. "What about your husband?" I asked. "Do you have children, grandchildren?" She shook her head. "No, I've never married." "How do you feel about being here? Do you miss anywhere else? Your family, maybe?" Again, she shook her head. "Not really. This is my home." As far as she knew, this was the only home she'd ever known. I tried to ask if she missed her family, but she just smiled and told me that her family was right here in Hungry Horse, Montana. We thanked her and left the hardware store. Hopping back into our park ranger truck, we drove deeper into the town. "I really don't like this, Sammy," Thomas said. "I've had a feeling of being watched ever since we entered town." I looked over at him. He was staring at a man standing by a large semi-trailer outside the diner. The man was holding a jug of milk. I couldn't help but think of the hiker we'd found dead last week. "Sam, are you listening to me?" I snapped back to reality and looked at my partner. Thomas had started quivering in fear. "Sorry, what did you say?" I said. "I think we should leave. I don't want to be here anymore." I looked around the town. There were so many people here, so many people who shouldn't be here. All of them were perfectly normal. Some of them even knew each other. How could there be so many people in a town that didn't exist? "I agree. Let's go," I said. We drove away from the town and back to the ranger cabin. Thomas was still shaking. "I'm going to call this in," he said. "This whole thing is bullshit, but we better document it anyway. I mean, how could an entire town full of missing people just appear in the middle of Yellowstone?" I nodded. "Okay, I'll be in the cabin. I think I need some time to process all this shit." I sat down on the couch and closed my eyes. It all felt unreal. I kept thinking about the hiker we'd found out in the woods last week. He died while out on a hike in the wilderness. He'd been alone and confused, but I just saw him alive and well in a town that doesn't exist. I opened my eyes and looked around. I took a deep breath and let it out. It smelled like wood smoke and pine. I stood up and started pacing the room. What am I supposed to make of all this? I asked myself. Is this some kind of sick joke? Did the government put a town in Yellowstone for some reason? What if it's not a town? Maybe it's a cover-up for something worse. I thought before zoning out. There was a knock on the door. It startled me out of my daydream. "Come in," I yelled. Two men came inside, both dressed in black suits. "Are you the one in charge here?" one of them asked. I looked at him and nodded. The guy was wearing a badge on his chest and a gun on his hip. He looked like an FBI agent. "I'm about to go and talk to them, and I don't know if they'll believe me. What the fuck do I do?" I was born to be sacrificed by my own parents. You'll be sacrificed to the Supreme God when you are old enough. That was what my parents always told me since I was around 5. That's the only reason you exist, they kept repeating. And learn, the Supreme God prefers educated victims. It was horrible growing up like this. I always knew something was wrong with our family. My parents held family meetings every month when they invited a few dozen people to our home, and they all went down to the basement. One time I asked my father what they were doing there. He said that they were showing respect to the one true God and that I will understand it when I'm sacrificed. As soon as I reached 15 years of age, I remember having a room alongside the kitchen. I wasn't allowed to go inside. It was always locked. Its door had a black window. It was impossible to see through it. My usual routine there was getting back from school, then spending the rest of the day learning. Locked in my room, my teachers always asked the same question from me and my classmates. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I had no answer. What should have I told them? That I'll be a sacrifice to some God my parents believed in. I mean, I probably even believed in this supreme God. After all, I was raised like this. I had no idea who was right, my parents or our religion teacher. Years went by living like this, and I had no idea how unusual that was. And as the years went by, my 15th birthday came closer and closer. I remember talking with a friend a day before my birthday. I tried to say goodbye, knowing that I'll be dead by next week, and I still didn't understand why. During this conversation, my friend told me that I must be joking. When I finally told him that I'd be sacrificed, he laughed at me. It took a minute for him to realize that I wasn't joking. "What?" he asked. I was born to be sacrificed to this god. They have told me since I was a little kid, I responded. His face was confused. Mate, are your parents crazy? That's not normal. I mean, what the hell, dude? Call the police. Don't be stupid. No, you don't understand. That's the only reason I exist. Mate, I'm telling this to my parents tomorrow when they get home. That's crazy, he argued. I begged him not to do it because I would get in trouble. Damn, I was a stupid kid. The following day was a Saturday. It was my birthday. I woke up and spent the first half of the day learning in my room after I had breakfast. It was around lunchtime when I saw cars stopping at our house from the window. I counted at least 21 people arriving and coming inside. They probably went to the basement as usual, but I had no idea what to do. I was afraid. Is it my last day on Earth? I asked myself. I just couldn't believe they would kill me. I haven't done anything wrong. I remembered the previous day and what my friend told me. He was right. That's crazy. They're crazy, and I shouldn't let them kill me just because they are crazy. I tried to open my door, but as usual, it was locked. I panicked and kicked the door, hoping they couldn't hear it as they were in the basement. The door stood still. It had an old lock, so I thought it couldn't be that hard to open it with force. Well, I was wrong. I kicked it again and again. My leg hurt like hell when the lock finally surrendered and the door opened. I couldn't believe that I could just finally leave that damn house. I slowly walked down the stairs, trying not to make any sound. Also because I couldn't stand correctly on my left leg because of that fucking door. I reached the kitchen and tried to open the door to escape the house, but it was also locked. It was the only door leading outside. I looked to my left, where the door with the black window was. I still haven't set foot inside. I went there to open it. I hoped that I could find the keys or something that could help me get out of the house. As I opened the door, I froze. Since I was born, I wasn't allowed to go inside that room. It had a reason. The room was large. It was probably the biggest room in the entire house, and in the corner, I still have no idea what was there that day. It was a terrifying creature. Its skin was glowing in green and purple. It was crawling on at least 5 legs and had a horrifying face resembling a human with long brown hair. It screamed at me. I slammed the door shut and tried to run somewhere, but my family also heard the scream from the basement, and they came upstairs. We told you not to go there. My mother shouted at me, but it doesn't matter anymore. You'll be sacrificed today as it was said by the prophecy. Before I could do anything, my father grabbed my arm and dragged me down into the basement. When we reached it, I could see dozens of people who arrived earlier that day. The basement was designed like some kind of ritual place. I saw an altar and lots of strange symbols unknown to me. My father pushed me on top of a table and tied me down with a rope. I screamed, but nobody cared. They started chanting, rhythmic nonsense. There's no other way to describe it. My father grabbed an old knife, or rather a dagger. I screamed even harder, then heard something from upstairs. Everyone looked up as armed police forces rushed down the stairs. Everyone, hands up, they shouted. It was so surreal. I can't even remember what happened afterward. I remember a few days later when they told me that my parents were in prison, and that I'll be placed in a school in another state. I still don't know if they found that thing in the room with the black door. I spent the next few years constantly talking with a psychologist. I want to find out what happened at my old house. I want to know what that creature was that lived there, and I want to know who the God my parents believed in. I'll find out one day, I know. Are you proud of everything you have done in your life? A guy reached for my coffee cup before me, holding it away as he asked, "Are you proud of everything you have done in your life?" I stared at him in offense, my lip curled at his pale, hairless face. "That's mine, freak." He handed it to me. "Are you?" "Fuck you," I snapped, snatching it out of his long, bony fingers. I walked out of the coffee shop, scoffing at that freak's audacity as I took a sip. The last thing I needed was a philosophical weirdo stealing my time, patience, and coffee when I was in a hurry. Hustling back to my office building, I wrinkled my nose at the crumpled pile of drug addicts on the side of the sidewalk. The city was going to shit. After crossing the street, I frowned at another group of collapsed druggies. One of them was on his back, and he looked eerily like my college roommate. Coincidence? Creepy coincidence. They all looked the same, these addicts. A screech of tires drew my attention away from the vagrants, and I turned around just in time to see a car hit an old, homeless man. The hobo bounced off the hood and crashed to the ground, his bones cracking as he landed in a heap. Moaning, he reached out to the driver for help as blood dripped down his busted face, and the driver ran him over. I gasped as the hobo rolled beneath the wheels, his brain squirting out of his crushed skull as the car zoomed away. Coincidence? Creepy coincidence. I jumped as something tugged at my pants, and I kicked away one of the addict's hands in disgust. She rolled on her back with a hoarse groan, and I froze at the sight of the mole on her gaunt face. My college friend had one in the exact same spot. The addict peeked through her eyelids. She has the same eye color too. Coincidence. Creepy coincidence. It had to be. Her cracked lips opened, but before she could utter a word, whatever life she had left faded from her glazed eyes. Before I could react, a commotion pushed me aside as a gaggle of officers escorted a woman out of a residential building beside me. Was she my former supervisor? It couldn't be. Coincidence. Just a creepy coincidence. Her husband was running after them, an infant in his hands, both of them crying. The woman kept tearfully proclaiming she was innocent, but I didn't see what happened next as a second screech made me jump and turn around. I stared in disbelief as another car bounced a homeless man off its hood before mashing him beneath its wheels and speeding off. A chill crept beneath my skin as I watched the hobo's brain ooze. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. What was happening? My pulse racing, I turned to see if the police had noticed the accident, only to realize the chaos had multiplied. Every building door around me had erupted with cops, pleading hubbies, wailing babies, and tearful declarations of innocence from an overly familiar woman. Vehicles zoomed down the street, flinging bums left and right before running them over. Uncomfortably familiar addicts lurched and stumbled from every corner, collapsing at my feet. With my terrified heart drumming, I backed away, only to scream as I bumped into someone. I whipped around, and my wide eyes landed on the pale, hairless face of the freak from the coffee shop. "Are you proud of everything you have done in your life?" he asked, expressionless. "Who are you? What's going on?" I yelled, trying to stifle the fear in my trembling voice. "Are you?" I flinched as another car's tires screeched. "Who the hell are you? What do you want?" "I want to know if you are proud of everything you have done in your life, and I want the truth, for the truth will set you free." I froze at his choice of words. What are you? An angel? Answer my question first." No, I'm not proud of everything I've done," I said, my tight breaths jacking as I kicked away the vagrants clawing at my legs. I regret dealing drugs. I regret the hit and run. I regret getting my supervisor fired." "No, you don't." I gulped as I tried to hold his dry, emotionless gaze. Yes, I do." "No, you don't. Tell me the truth." I frowned in frustrated distress, my breaths accelerating. "Is this a test?" "Yes, and the truth is the only correct answer." I jerked away from a crawling addict who looked like my freshman year lab partner. "Oh, okay." I winced in tense resignation. I'm an ambitious person. That is a good start. I was a drug dealer in college. I started selling to my friends, then branched out. I was a bit pushy, but that's how I made a ton, and yes, I'm proud of that. I don't have student loans because of that, and it's not my fault they died. I took drugs too, but I knew my limits. I didn't let anyone push me. I gawked as the throng of addicts moaning around me vanished. "How?" "Go on," he said, unfazed. Desperate for answers, I decided to continue giving him what he wanted. After graduating, I got my job off pure talent, but I couldn't advance because my supervisor suspected I was spying for the competition. She was right, so I had 2 reasons to get rid of her. I planted drugs in her office on her sick day and tattled to the CEO. He fired her, called the cops, and gave me her job. So, yeah, I'm proud I managed to save my ass and advance in the company. I stumbled as cops shoved me aside, a baby's screams making me wince as the father rushed by, begging for his wife's release. I know this scene looks bad, but she worked 24/7, barely even saw her husband and kid, so it's not like they'd be lost without her. They had a nanny and her husband worked too, and she was just recently released. Her reputation got shaky, but it's not like I ruined her life. Just like the addicts, the groups of cops, supervisors, husbands, and babies vanished before my stunned eyes. "Go on," he said. I glanced at the latest mangled hobo. At my promotion party, I drank more than I should have, and I hit a homeless man while driving home. He was still alive, asking me for help, but I wasn't about to lose everything I worked hard on for someone useless no one cared about. I did him a favor and put him out of his misery, and yes, I'm proud I got away with it. My life is worth more than his. Just like the others, the bodies and zooming cars disappeared, leaving the strange man and me standing alone in a quiet, empty city. "Anything else?" he asked. I shook my head, then I frowned and shook it again as dizziness took over. "What's happened?" I asked, my words slurring as I stumbled against the wall. "Perhaps it was your coffee." I looked at him in terror. "Whey Apunanit, the same thing you put in Drew's drink." My labored heart dropped. I had an antidote, I mumbled in a frenzy as I slumped to the ground. I wanted gratitude and twists. I'm proud I found a way to get in my inner circle. No one got permanently hurt. I gasped as my head cleared, and I scrambled upright on shaky legs. Please tell me what you are. I looked around at the vacant, motionless city, my suspicions culminating in dread. Am I dead? Was this a test to see if I made it to heaven? Did I pass? You did pass, but you will not be going to heaven. His words tore through my remaining composure and I fell to my knees. You said the truth would set me free. I don't belong in hell. All the stuff I did, it's survival of the fittest. We're all fighting to get ahead in life. So many put themselves first to gain power and money. Why not me? Everyone should be doing that. It's the game of life. All I did was take what God gave me and use it to survive in His world. That isn't a sin. There is no heaven. I stared, blindsided. What? There is no heaven, no hell, at least not in the way you know them. And you are not dead. But then what? What are you? What was this test? I am here to recruit you. Recruit me. A war is coming. We are building an army. A war. Fear rippled down my spine as I got back to my feet. Where? Against who? You will know these details if you accept. But are you the good guys? We are all fighting for what we believe in. You mentioned survival of the fittest. Accepting this offer would be to your advantage. Why me? It will be a dirty war. We are recruiting the most ruthless, opportunistic, and unscrupulous of beings. Do you accept it? What if I say no? Your memory will be wiped and you will return to your life to ultimately die when the war begins. I gulped. And if I say yes, you will come with me to begin your training. My eyes scanned the empty streets, uncertainty and desire winding through my flustered mind. May I be allowed a day to sort out a few things? That can be arranged. This is my final message to all you weak, righteous losers out there thinking you're doing the right thing. Enjoy perishing in a war you'll never survive. The meek won't be inheriting the earth, the ruthless will. Stay out of the Rocky Mountains at night. An Airbnb offer that seemingly was too good to be true caught my eye while planning a long weekend getaway with my friends. It was a 6-bed, room cottage with a gorgeous view in the Rocky Mountains and was only an hour drive out of my city. It'd be cool enough outside at night to warrant the hot tub there, and we'd get a beautiful view of the autumn trees in the daytime. I checked the forecast, 25 deg for 3 days straight. The pricing was also good. Splitting between the 6 of us would total $66 each. I showed it to the company I'd be taking, and immediately we booked it. I was the first one to arrive after a scenic drive with winding roads. It was fairly isolated. I couldn't hear the noise pollution from the Trans-Canada Highway like you normally could if you stayed in Banff or Canmore. That also meant I could hear the sounds of any approaching vehicles. I took in the scenery for about 2 minutes before the next car pulled up. It was Nick and Dakota. They lumbered out of Nick's rusty but reliable car. They loosely gripped their belongings with them, which consisted mostly of books and pot. Shall we see if we didn't get swindled with some shite cottage? I asked them. May as well, Nick replied nonchalantly. The outside of the cottage matched the pictures to a T. No doubt it had received immaculate care. The patios were spotless, the hot tub clean and large. The glass didn't have a single smear or spot on it. It was only one level, but it was very large from the outside. I noticed Dakota was staring into the trees and keeping himself unusually quiet. Not to your liking, I inquired. It's only a little bit different from BC, Dakota hummed. But it's nice. It'll be good to relax here. Both of them were intelligent, but a bit snobby to a fault. They weren't the easiest to impress, but they both looked out for me. And in turn, I valued their friendship and kept them included in my events. A stiff wind sent chills down my spine, and I could tell Nick and Dakota both felt the cold, too. Let's go inside, I suggested. Getting chilly, the inside was just as extravagant as the outside. The amount of space each area had was on par with miniature mansions. There was a fireplace, lots of couches, and each bed there was a king-sized one. A definite upgrade from my queen-sized bed at home. The 3 of us called dibs on the first rooms, and I was satisfied with my view of a few mountains that the sun would perfectly set between at night. Not only that, the pantry was chocked full of all sorts of non-perishable food. Funny, I didn't see anything about food being given to us. I told everyone to pack accordingly, so we were gonna be filled up in no time. Thumping could be heard in the distance, which alerted me. You guys hear that too? Hey, I asked Nick. He chuckled. I think the rest of your friends are here. I peeked out the window as the thumping got louder. He was right. The thumping was coming from the music that Xander, Brandon, and CJ were listening to in CJ's SUV. I could hear them bellowing with enthusiasm from here, hands swinging wildly out of the windows as CJ parked. Are you ready to feel how old we are? Dakota asked Nick. I'm thankful I brought some earplugs, Nick answered. Should help with these fucking loons. Come on guys, you're not that much older than them, I cooed. What, 5 years? Nick and Dakota had just celebrated their 30th birthdays 2 months ago. My 24th was coming up in a week, so this was like a pre-party for that. The other 3 matched my age. I hopped out of the cottage to greet the others. I hope you brought your game and a whole lot of alcohol, I announced, arms open. Holy shit, this place is nice, CJ gasped, stepping out of the SUV. Brandon and Xander didn't say much but gave me a pleasant nod as they hauled their coolers inside. Didn't get swindled, can't find a flaw here yet, I said, breathing in the fresh air and doing a 360 of my surroundings. I'm a little cold though. CJ checked his arms, the hair standing upwards on them. He brooded a little. Wasn't it supposed to be hot this weekend? Yeah, I know, but hey, at least we have a hot tub. Shit, ain't that the truth? He went inside with the others. There was a definite difference in my 2 age groups. Dakota and Nick spent much of their time on the first day smoking weed and reading at the back patio. Xander and Brandon spent much of their time drinking heavily and getting rowdy with each other. They recently had an issue of liking the same girl, who I invited but couldn't attend, who ultimately chose Xander. I noticed them getting into a shoving match and I held back Xander. CJ got on Brandon. I don't want to play bouncer with you guys. Wasn't this shit behind you guys? I said, still holding on to Xander. He was no match, and CJ was easily overpowering Brandon. Yeah, but this asshat keeps saying how bad of a fuck I am to her, Xander answered with a labored voice. It's cause you are, man. Callie deserves someone who can last more than a minute. Brandon barked back. Who the fuck cares about that? We're here to have a good time, CJ said, giving an extra squeeze on his hold. There was a moment of silence apart from the music that was playing in the living room. We both let go of our squabbling friends, and Brandon left in a huff. I'm going for a walk. Don't let Rasputin there follow me unless he wants a beating, Brandon yelled, flipping off Xander. Xander stroked his lengthy beard and scoffed. I couldn't help but chuckle. Brandon's description of Xander was accurate. Hey, you shouldn't be going alone, I called out, but it fell on deaf ears. I sighed, leaving the living room to join Dakota on the patio outside. Dakota offered me a joint and I gladly accepted it. As I lit it up with him, he gestured over to something I didn't notice while I was inspecting the place before. It was a sign that had been nailed above the door I had just walked out of. Extreme caution. Do not go out alone at night. They will find you. I read aloud. I turned back to Dakota. What do you think they are? Dakota shrugged. Bears maybe. It's the pre-hibernation season, after all. Didn't mention it in the ad, did they? I took a look at the sun. It was about 3 hours before it had been noticeably dark out. Nick joined the 2 of us and lit up a joint as well. Where were you? Dakota asked. In my room, trying my hardest not to laugh at Jay's shit friends go at it. Nick sneered. I rolled my eyes. I pondered between my drags, the sign weighing on my mind. Think I should look for Brandon? I finally asked, breaking the silence. Nah, he'll be fine. The trails here don't stretch long according to the map, Nick said. Let him have his boohoo and he'll be back soon enough. The 2 older guys always kept me a little grounded, and I was grateful for it. I noticed things were back to normal after I peeked into the window. Xander and CJ were gaming and laughing like they normally do. 2 hours had passed and Brandon still hadn't returned. I pulled up the ad for the cottage, and nothing in the description had mentioned the sign anywhere. Not even the owners mentioned it in the ad. I sat at the table stirring my dark and stormy I made for myself, glaring at the ad. I must have been glaring hard because Xander slowly approached me, seating himself. Everything all right, man? He asked me. I pictured myself up, snapping out of my thoughts. Yeah, just weirded out by that sign outside, looking at the ad and there's not a goddamn thing. Concerned about Brandon going off on his own. You know, Xander raised an eyebrow. A sign. I gestured over to the back entrance and he went to read it and came back to me. That's awfully weird, he said. Good thing it's just Brandon. But he contributed, man. He's a friend, too. But now I'm nervous that they are gonna find me if I go out looking for him. I worried. I'm just trying not to think about it. Xander gave me an assuring pat on the back. How about you don't think about it and come play some games with CJ and your old folks? I chuckled and proceeded to play some beer pong with the rest of them. Another hour passed, and the 5 of us piled into the hot tub together. We had all drank ourselves into losing track of time, and I had completely forgotten about Brandon. The sun was basically set and the view of the stars had me in awe. We had all gotten to shooting the shit when CJ piped up. "Where's Brandon? Is he back yet?" There was a pause. I took a deep breath. "Brandon," I shouted out, my voice echoing into the mountain range. I shouted some more. "Brandon, Brandon, Brandon. Brandon L. Lawrence gets over here." CJ called out into the rocks and trees. We heard what sounded like a warped echo of CJ's voice in the distance. I raised an eyebrow at that, but assumed it was the distance CJ's mighty voice carried. "Well, if we're smart, unlike Brandon there, we should be inside by now," Dakota suggested. "Keep one of the doors unlocked for him, I guess." A heavy cold breeze hit all of us. It even made the hot tub feel like an ice bath. We all flinched, getting ourselves back into the cottage without a word. The alcohol put us to sleep not long after. "Dude, you gotta get up." CJ shook me awake. I turned on the lamp on my bedside table instinctively. I rubbed my eyes awake, looking at CJ. His eyes were wide with fear. He was shaking as he slapped the switch on the lamp. We were plunged back into darkness once again. "What the hell, man?" I said, sitting myself up. I wrapped my blankets around me. The place was freezing. "There's something outside," he said in a frantic, hushed tone. "Is it Brandon?" "I don't think so. Brandon doesn't walk on 4 legs." I got out of bed, shivering like crazy as I threw on some clothes. CJ ushered me to the living room, where the rest of the guys were already up. All of them were on high alert. I lurched over to the group. "What's going on?" "It's like 2 in the morning," I grumpily demanded. "Something's walking around, I already told you," CJ hissed. I didn't hear anything like I normally could. "Where do you think it is, Nick?" "You heard it first," Dakota asked, sounding much calmer than the others. "Probably by Jay's room," Nick grumbled. I started hearing what was outside. It was brushing up against the outside of the house. It took heavy steps. I peeked towards my room as the door cracked open. Oh fuck. I saw a lumbering creature with grizzled fur pass my window. It made a gurgling sound as it passed my open window. "Is that a bear?" Xander asked. "Looks that way," Nick said. "Let's wait till it goes away before we head back to bed." "Brandon's still not back," CJ said, a little louder. I swear to God if that bear got him. The moving thing outside stopped, then circled back in the other direction at a faster pace. The back door was a glass one, and it wasn't covered up. We were about to see our night terror in the flesh. We all braced, looking for something to defend ourselves with. It was a bear, but something was wrong with it. It was the size of a grizzly, but it had very mangy fur. When the bear tripped the motion light outside, I noticed that one of its paws looked like it had been chewed up. It also had multiple gashes in its side. I could smell the blood from here, and it was foul. "Holy shit, what do we do?" I whined. I had never seen such a wounded, large beast in front of me before. Wounded animals are dangerous, but what the hell could have wounded a grizzly like that? "Stay still," Dakota hissed. "It'll piss off soon enough, but if it breaks the glass, we make a break for it." My eyes darted around the room, and when I peered back through the window in my room, I noticed something swaying in the tree line, more like something crashing through the trees. The bear was walking away from the cottage when I heard the shriek. It damn near popped our eardrums, but I could hear the swift scurrying of something fast approaching from the side. I kicked my door shut, hoping it wouldn't make much noise. "That definitely wasn't the bear," Xander groaned, covering his ears. "Hide," I yelled, ducking behind the couch instinctively. There was enough room that the couches made cover for all of us. I kept my eyes out looking towards the wounded animal when the carnage unfolded. A long, very bony arm grabbed the bear by the head and snapped its neck. I heard what I could only describe as a giggle coming from whatever did that. The thing stepped more into view. It was gigantic and thin, and when it lowered its head, it had a long mane and a dog-like face. It walked on 2 legs, much of its hair draped over its naked, wrinkly body. It began to chew on the bear's head. It peered at us, and CJ pulled my head back behind the couch. "Oh God, did it see us?" I whispered, nearly crying. "What is that?" CJ cried, doing his best to keep quiet. "That's fucking scary, man," Nick whispered, his composure loosening. "I hope it's only the bear it's after. Let's keep out of sight." I heard something touch the glass, then drop. It sounded like it was smearing something on the window. I didn't dare look at that. We heard it step around, but eventually it began walking away from the camp. I had to know. I poked my head up from behind the couch and saw it. There were 3 of them now, the 2 newer ones smaller than the first. They dragged the bear behind as they ran away into the mountains on all fours. None of us moved from our spot, nor did any of us really sleep. We'd periodically check on one another to make sure we were good, but truthfully, none of us were. Some of us contemplated on calling the cops or the owners of the cottage, but that was objected to for at least the night. It was about 4:30 a.m. when Dakota finally stood up. "Guys," he said. Even in the darkness, I could tell he was turning pale. More of us stood up. First Nick, then CJ, then me, then Xander lastly. "Is that?" CJ slowly asked. I damn near fainted. At the glass door, there was a bloody smear that coated the door from a few feet up to the ground. There was a lump of something on the ground outside. I had hoped it was a chunk of bear, but I was dead wrong. Nick got up and opened the door slowly, and the stench of death wafted into the cottage. "Oh shit," he groaned, and proceeded to puke outside around the corner. I was fearful something was gonna jump out and maul him to death, but he made it inside quickly. The lump of flesh outside was Brandon's maimed, severed head. We all made it back into town, but I don't dare spending another night at a remote cabin or cottage in the Rockies. You're better off at a hotel in Banff or Canmore. Ideally, you're better off spending the night far from these mountains. Just stay out of the Rockies at night, no matter where. If you're alone, they probably will find you. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.